I'm Claire, and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm gonna break down my favorite way to plot ever. This is a method called the plot grid. I found this method by reading an article about the way that J.K. Rowling plotted the Harry Potter books, and for some reason, this just clicked in my brain. The plot grid makes seeing everything in your book very easy. It gives you a bird's eye view of the book and also allows you to see everything that you need to put in any particular chapter in order to help that chapter advance the story and every single subplot you want to include. So I'm going to break down how the plot grid works and give you some examples of plot grids that I've developed for different drafts of my own stories. So first, what is a plot grid? A plot grid is an outline for a book written out as a grid, usually written either on paper or using a program such as Microsoft Excel. This is the example of a plot grid that I saw online, and it's part of the outline for J.K. Rowling's The Order of the Phoenix. As you can see, every row corresponds to a chapter, and every column corresponds to either the number of the chapter, the time the chapter occurred, the title of the chapter, if you're using titles, a brief synopsis of the chapter, and then every single subplot you are covering in the book. So as you can see in this example, the subplots include the prophecy, the romantic subplot, Dumbledore's army, the Order of the Phoenix, the Snape/Harry/father, and Hagrid and Grawp. So then in each row, you write down in the box corresponding with the right column what happens in that chapter to advance that particular subplot. That way, you can track the way that your subplots develop over the course of your book and make sure each subplot has an arc and that you don't drop anything. Also, having to put the date next to the chapters can help you keep track of when things occur in the book so that, for example, you are not writing a scene that happens at Christmas 2 days away from Halloween. So this is the general concept of a plot grid. The reason I love using plot grids so much is that I used to really struggle juggling all of the different things that I would need to think about going into a book as I was writing it. I kept falling into the pitfalls of dropping subplots because I would just forget that I had even established them. I'd forget to make things consistent in each chapter. It's so easy to get wrapped up in one plot and just forget that you haven't talked about something else in a while, and creating a plot grid helps you not forget that because you are visually confronted with empty boxes in the grid that signify that you haven't talked about a particular thing in a while. Plot grids give you this sort of bird's eye view of your book that you wouldn't usually get when you are in the actual manuscript. You can get caught up in the nitty-gritty details of your manuscript, and using a plot grid can help you step back from that. I also believe that plot grids make your writing easier. If you pour your heart and soul into your plot grid and fill all of the boxes that you want to just to make sure that every subplot is fleshed out enough, then when you're writing, you can just trust your plot grid and you don't have to stress as much about remembering all the things in your book because you know that if you write and check all of the boxes that you had written down previously in your plot grid, that your chapter is going to properly advance these subplots and your main story. It gives you a really great structure, and it is my favorite way to outline because it just lets me see the book as a big picture. So when I was working on They Stay, I used plot grids. So now I'm going to show you the 2 plot grids that I created for this book and walk you through how I built them. I discovered the plot grid method after I'd already finished my first draft. I was in the process of assessing the plot and figuring out which issues I had with it and where there were a lot of gaps and what things just weren't sitting right with me and what things I could take a step further. I created a plot grid for the second draft of They Stay, and I filled in each of the boxes to create an outline for what I wanted the book to be, not necessarily what the book already was. So I had just written this first draft, and there was a lot of stuff in there that I liked, so I put all of that stuff into the plot grid, and then I added more stuff and changed stuff around, and tried to use the creation of the plot grid as like a draft 1.5. Like instead of writing a full second draft and revising that way, I incorporated my revisions into my plot grid, and I spent a lot of time thinking through what I wanted this book to look like. It was a way for me to just briefly sketch out everything. So I'm going to show you my plot grids, but they do contain lots of spoilers for They Stay, so I'm not going to show you all of them, and I'm going to blur out parts of them. So I had to recover this file, so as you can see, a lot of the boxes are empty because this, I think, was saved at a time when I was still in the process of creating the plot grid. The book has also changed a lot since I wrote this plot grid. Like, a lot of the characters have new names, there are a lot more subplots that were added, but as you can see, I have the number, the time, the title, the general plot, which is essentially the main plot of my book. They Stay follows a girl who is searching for her little brother, and that is the main core of the book. So in that plot box, I would just write all of the mystery stuff and talk about the different clues that they would find and different ways that would advance. And then I had a column for my main bromance in the book. I had a column for my main character's growth. I had a column for one of my other characters' discovery of her supernatural powers. I had a column for the world building, and I had 2 columns for different suspects and people that my main characters were investigating. So if I wanted to create a red herring, I would just write down in the boxes like hint at sketchy behavior here for this person, so that when I was writing the chapter, I could be reminded that in this chapter I needed to write in an instance of sketchy behavior for this person. I did one of these rows for every single chapter. I think I started writing the plot grid by filling in the boxes with all of the things in the book that were really important that I couldn't do without for the plot, and then I filled in the rest with things that I wanted to add. After I wrote this grid, I wrote the entire book again and did an entire second draft. So I just went through the book and rewrote every single chapter according to what I had chosen to do in the plot grid, and the book became stronger. But as I was working through draft 2, I noticed some things in the book that I didn't really love. I noticed a couple of things that weren't done correctly. I noticed a bunch of places where I could just turn up the intensity. I also wanted to create more of a creepy feel to the whole book. Just a side note, the plot grid method is amazingly good for mysteries and thrillers. Because you can track every single time that clues are dropped, books like this are really hard to plot because you have to be really choosy about when you reveal stuff, so seeing it all in the big picture can really help with that. But I finished my second draft, and then I had all these other things that I wanted to add to it, so I wanted to go write a third draft, so I created an entirely new plot grid. This one was much more in-depth and also color-coded. Not like intensely color-coded, but like mildly color-coded. I didn't want to do a complete overhaul rewrite for draft 3, so instead what I did is that I wrote down everything that I had already written in draft 2 in black, and written everything that I wanted to add in green. So then I could go back through the chapters and just make sure that I added the green stuff to the already written stuff. So most of the green stuff is underneath the columns of different creepy details that I wanted to add, and also some new little world building elements. There were a couple of little plot things in there that I wanted to just turn up the heat a little bit on. So doing draft 3 seemed a little bit more manageable. After I finished draft 3, I worked with the developmental editor on the book, and then I got some feedback from beta readers, which was super awesome, and I was able to go back through the book and just heighten the levels of intensity of different parts where they pointed out that I had the opportunity to do so. Then I did a huge rewrite and changed the tense of the entire book, and I just generally embellished the book. I added little things, I changed little things, and I also worked with a line editor to make sure that the prose was really strong, and I didn't use plot grids at all for that. I've never used a plot grid on a first draft, but it is something that I want to try. I might experiment with that for the They Stay sequel, given that I already know so much about the characters and the journeys that they're going to take, and I know where the They Stay sequel is going to start and where it's going to end. So now that I know the characters and the subplots, doing a series grid up front might be easier, but I also want to explore a little bit, and in my first draft really see different things that I could do with this book, because I want to keep it interesting, and I think that there's a lot to be said for exploring in your first draft, and discovering things about the characters and about the story that you wouldn't discover if you were just thinking up front trying to create a plot grid. So you might be asking yourself, plot grids sound cool, but how do you exactly fill the boxes? Like, what are you supposed to put in these boxes? Having multiple subplots in the book and having some more present than others can make for a really engaging and dynamic reading experience. Because if you read about the same plot over and over and over again, it might not be as interesting as if you read about one plot here and then another romantic subplot is brought out a little bit more in the next chapter, and there's this other thing that you stopped thinking about that is going to be really important brought out in the next chapter. It creates a fuller world than if you're just focused on one plot. Even though some subplots might require more attention than other subplots, you want to try to make sure that every single one of your subplots has an arc. Just like how in your main story, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and somewhere between the middle and the end, there is a climax of the story. There is something your character wants, there's something standing in their way, and as they fight to get it, this action comes to a head during your climax. It's the same with subplots. Let's say you have a subplot in your book where 2 people are dating. Let's say that one really wants kids and one really doesn't want kids, but they really love each other. And over the course of the book, maybe they start fighting, and their fights start really small, but slowly grow in intensity over the course of the book. These fights have to crescendo into the climax of your story. And then after the climax, you can figure out how you're gonna resolve this. But the action ramps up like that. So you want your subplots to build. They can each follow their own mini story arc. So as you're developing your subplots, having a column for a subplot allows you to track the way that your subplot is building, separate from everything else in the story. You can make sure that every single little fight that that couple is having is getting slightly worse than the last. Or let's say that you're writing a mystery, and one of your subplots is your characters examining a suspect. You can use the column in your series grid to mark down the places where you dropped hints about your suspect. Each of these hints can maybe be more damning than the one before, and the climax of that subplot can be you finding out who the suspect is. It just makes keeping track of things easier. So how do I recommend using plot grids? Honestly, it depends how you write. In my experience, plot grids are really well liked by plotters. But if you're a pantser, you can also use plot grids, but maybe make them not quite as filled in as you would if you were a plotter. Maybe you want to do a full draft of your book that's completely exploratory with maybe just a very vague outline or an idea of where you want to end up, and use a plot grid when you're trying to figure out how to take your story to the next level. And if you really thrive while writing with an outline that is this detailed, maybe you want to do a plot grid right off the bat. But I would recommend experimenting with it because it fundamentally changed the way that I write, and I just love being able to have the big picture view of where I'm going and what I need to do in every chapter in order to get there. So that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Claire Fraze, and I'm an award-winning young adult author who makes videos on this channel talking about actionable writing tips that helped me take my writing to the next level. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more videos. I post once a week, and I also currently have a giveaway running. If you haven't already entered, go to the link in the description and check it out. I'm giving away 4 young adult thrillers to 4 lucky readers. So if you want to win a young adult thriller and a reader care package, go enter your email in the link in the description. Have a good week, everyone, and as always, happy writing.